for joining. Looking forward to getting some of your thoughts. Would love to start by just hearing a little bit about you and why you got involved in democracy work at Take Back Our Republic and the other work that you've been doing. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your story and why you care about the work.
Okay. Um, well, thanks for giving me the opportunity to sit down and have a conversation about this. And I first got involved in the democracy space back in 2015. Started with Take Back Our Republic. We were a right of center nonprofit that was really kind of heavily involved in the money and politics space, and how that money was used to influence elections and issues at the federal and state level. As the organization grew, we expanded into gerrymandering, and eventually, different voting issues. Then after the 2016 election cycle, that's really when that right versus left definition of pro-democracy really started coming into the picture. And the organization, we started looking into some of the pro-democracy issues, and it really kind of piqued, my interest overall, and have kind of been working in it, ever since that time.
Great. So you sort of alluded to this, but I mean, I'd love your explanation of what you would define as a pro-democracy community. You talked about the left versus right definitions. Be curious if you could get into that a little bit too.
Okay, yeah. Well, I think the pro-democracy community can be defined as a diverse group of organizations. You got some activists. You got initiatives that are kind of dedicated to strengthening and preserving the democratic institutions and their values. There are organizations promoting civic education and participation, and you've got some coalitions that are striving to reduce the influence of corporate money in politics. And then you've also got movements that are opposing the partisan gerrymandering. You know, overall, I think the pro-democracy community, in some instances, aims to be nonpartisan. And they're focusing on strengthening the civic participation and reforming the democratic institutions that we have, and also improving some of the civic culture. Um, I believe the pro democracy movement must also they need to really distinguish between policies they disagree with and the actions that generally threaten the democratic principles. I think there should be more collaborations between conservative and left-leaning pro-democracy advocates. Um, I think they really need to increase the emphasis on civics education, um, reduce the political polarization, and really try to put together programs to rebuild trust in elections.
And so what do you think the ramifications are on that if we sort of talk about what some of the strengths of the pro-democracy movement are right now, and the challenges of the pro-democracy movement are given what you're saying. Would love to hear a little bit about what you see as some of the strengths and challenges.
Uh, well, I think well, from a conservative perspective, I think the main challenges of the that really the challenge on the community are, I think the community is really kind of dominated by progressive activists and
Hmm.
funders, and they're kind of pushing a partisan agendas under the guise of protecting democracy. I think they focus heavily on claims of voter suppression while ignoring legitimate concerns about election integrity and the overall security. Um,
Hmm.
and these groups often bypass the state legislatures through the courts and federal
Hmm.
mandates that kind of dust they're undermining the actual state sovereignty and local control of elections. I just believe that their top-down approach kind of contradicts constitutional federalism. Um,
Hmm.
Also, I think the movement lacks real grassroots support. They're
Hmm.
relying on kind of the elite foundations and donors that are kind of concentrated mostly in the coastal cities. And the problem is their solutions reflect urban progressive priorities rather than the diverse local community needs. Um, and also, I think the inflammatory rhetoric about threats to democracy kind of deepens the division, rather than building trust in democratic institutions. They often kind of dismiss the valid conservative concerns on election administration as always being anti-democratic.
So, well, when you say that there's too much focus on the national, unpack that a little bit right now. Why do you think that's the case? I mean, you were talking about how, you think folks on the left are sort of pushing progressive ideology, and have a top-down approach. Is that why you think that there's, too much focus from the community on what's happening at the federal level?
Well, I think that the biggest impact is happening on the the national level because what I
Hmm.
think happens when I say that top down, there the problem is I think a lot of the left as opposed to really looking at the laws and working at the level to make the laws. If something happens they don't like, as opposed to following, say, the law, they'll go to court, they'll get a judge.
Hmm.
Just happening today, whatever's going on with the president, what he's trying to do with the government. What's happening is they do judge shopping, the left, and they'll find a judge somewhere that will, issue an order which will slow things down. It's really not going to stop it. It just slows things down, which I think is just,
Hmm.
unnecessary. You've got kind of that unelected bureaucracy, making policy. All right. And
Hmm.
that's not democracy. That's just not how it
Hmm.
works.
Hmm. So just to double a little bit more, do you what is that? I mean, you talked about the necessity for more of a grassroots approach and being sort of out of touch with the grassroots. Do you think that people care about democracy, or is there more of a focus on some of the, bread and butter issues that you were talking about, like, the fact that, I mean, folks are more focused on their own pocketbooks than on democracy. Do you think at the local level there is an ability, to care about some of these issues, or is it a little bit of an out of touch field right now?
Well, one of the things that um, I'm not so much afraid of, but what I'm worried about right now is there's a kind of an assault on federalism on some sides. Okay,
Hmm.
um, there I believe federalism really remains the vital framework for American democracy. And
Hmm.
offering stability and flexibility in governance. And
Hmm.
I think by understanding and actively maintaining the system, we can continue to strengthen our democratic governance for future generations. We need to preserve the core principles of divided sovereignty. When we get in, you talk about the local level. You've got the national politics and you've got the local. If we're going to maintain a pro democracy movement, we need to be able to meet those challenges and understand what those principles are. um, it, I think the success of American democracy really depends on maintaining that delicate balance between that national unity and state autonomy, and
Yeah.
understanding the national standards and local adaptation. um, we could have stability and innovation. If we stick to the federal principles and continue, commitment to the democratic values, I believe federalism can continue serving, its vital role in supporting and improving American democracy.
Go back to another point. I'm curious on the polarization. It seems like, you know, um, I mean, all these studies show that it is difficult for Americans to, um, to interact, have conversations with people of different ideological stripes. And it seems like this is, that's a fairly existential problem as it pertains to democracy, because part of it is if you have the left saying that, Trump and the right is a threat to democracy, the right would say similar things about the left. Everything is amplified so much. Every election is the most important election in our lifetime. Love if you could, I mean, how big of a threat do you think that is? The fact that you have this extreme polarization, and have you seen that get worse over time too?
Um, I think, as I said earlier, we're not really sitting down and having the basic conversations that are needed. And
Hmm.
we're at the point where we're letting the national, media, whether it's, the national media, then you have the online media and so forth. Everyone, has an issue. People, 40, 50, 40 years ago, everyone got their news from two or three different sources. Now it's
Hmm.
20, 25 different sources, and they're not all on the same page. You've got
Hmm.
25, different ideas on different issues and so forth. So the answer to your question is, we need to take two steps back, whether it's on the left and the right, and really kind of sit down, and we need to understand what democracy is, and
Hmm.
how, what's the definition of it. And
Hmm.
the problem is, that there are certain policies that I don't like, and if it goes into place, or say the president now is enacting certain rules, well, the left saying, well, that's against democracy, has nothing to do with democracy. Okay, you need
Hmm.
to go back to find out what is the definition of democracy. All right, we have some
Hmm.
core issues, and I think it goes back to the federalism, and understand, and a lot of people don't understand that. They say, well, United States is democracy. We're not. We're a representative republic. And,
Hmm.
and that's part of that education process that we need to start doing. And I think that's part of what some of these the 501c3s and so forth can do at the local level, is understanding, you know, you know, what is democracy, what is definition, understanding what the United States, how we were formed, and why we have, the laws that are in place that we have. We need to start really pushing that to the level where people really start understanding that, and it's going to reform the conversation. So now we can have, higher level conversation. People understand that just because something doesn't go their way has nothing to do with democracy. Okay,
Hmm.
it has to do with, a lot of times right or wrong, but also looking at that the party that's in power, and how, if they want to change things, then we get into, this is how we can come together to, make some adjustments on one side or the other.
Yeah, that makes sense. You've talked a little bit about, the need to understand what democracy is. I'm curious, what do you think some of the distinctions are in terms of how the left and the right view the concept and definition of democracy itself?
Um, well, I think when you look at, say, looking at, say, on the right, I think if you look at the on the right, we're free speech, free markets, understanding that the Constitution is the basis for all of our rights, and laws are based on what's written in the Constitution. And then you can say, look on the left, where they don't necessarily, they believe the Constitution is kind of an evolving, piece. Let's take, for instance, on the left, they want to increase the size of the Supreme Court, which, based on the way it's written right now, it was they were put into place for these particular reasons. It's been tried before. On the left, Roosevelt Franklin Roosevelt wanted to try to increase the size of the Supreme Court, which you can't do. Getting rid of the electoral college because the left feels that that is antiquated, but it was put in place for a reason, and they feel that the majority, when you get into a pure democracy, and you got where some countries where laws are voted on by the people. In this country, we let our elected officials in turn make the laws, and we in turn we vote for those elected officials, but we empower them to put together the laws that are going to govern everyone in the country. So I mean that's a big difference between the left and the right.
Do you think, I mean, when you think the things are getting wider, it's a little bit of the distinction between, you know, conservatives and Republicans got the majority of votes and Democrats saying that Trump is an existential threat to democracy. Like that seems like a fairly wide cliff, right?
Oh
Or
yeah, well,
wide gap.
but as I said, but that gets back to their definition of democracy. Trump
Hmm.
himself, they say he's an existential threat to democracy. Well, how? Like where, based
Hmm.
on the Constitution and how we define democracy, put that in, and they can't, and it's hard for them to do. As I said, they
Hmm.
believe anything they don't believe in
Hmm.
is anti-democracy, especially when it comes to anything in the government, what's going on. Whether it's like
Hmm.
right now, it's against democracy for the fact that he's trying to reform, the government, which is not really changing what the government does. It's trying to change the size and the cost. So
Hmm.
well, that's anti-democratic.